Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Young here and welcome to part 2 of Metal Gear Solid 5 lyrics analysis. In part 1 I analyzed the lyrics by looking at each line individually. In part 2 I'm going to analyze the entire song by looking at it as a whole without isolating any lines. It goes without saying you should watch part 1 if you haven't done so yet. Without further ado, let's dive right into it.
What took you so long?
If I had to summarize the message of the song in one sentence, I would say it is about a man referred to as the Father renouncing his past self without looking back to pursue a dark path of bloodshed and sins that will eventually lead to the salvation of soldiers. I know, huh? Just keep watching, I promise it'll become clearer. The question then becomes, who is the Father? It's easy to guess once you realize that the first letter of the word Father is capitalized like a formal name, meaning that this Father isn't just a general term representing all fathers, it's actually referring to one specific individual. It is hard to doubt that the Father is none other than Big Boss, who is the protagonist and the father of 3 sons, and the father of establishments such as MSF, Diamond Dogs, and Outer Heaven, which would serve as homes for soldiers without a homeland. I will talk more in-depth about this later. In the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these lyrics. The song begins with the following lines. Pride feeds their blackened hearts, and the thirst must be quenched to fuel hypocrisy. Cleansing flames is the only way to repent. Renounce what made you. End quote. My translation to that is as follows. Quote, their pride fuels their hate and thirst for revenge. They are too proud to submit to the suffering they had to endure. This thirst for revenge must be quenched to prove that they are abandoning their past ideals and committing hypocrisy. And once they go down this road, the only way to make amends is by cleansing themselves with the flames of hell, and there is no turning back. Going down this road means renouncing and killing their past self to be born anew. End quote. In short, the subjects of the lyrics are choosing a dark path that they can no longer come back from. Note that the pronouns used in this particular line include they and theirs, which could be referring to Big Boss and Kaz, or perhaps the entirety of Diamond Dogs. The next phrase goes as follows, quote, words that kill, would you speak them to me? With your breath so still, it makes me believe. End quote. My translation of this phrase is, will you speak lies to me? As I mentioned before in part 1, my belief is that the phrase words that kill stands for the word lies. One way lies can be considered words that kill is that lies can kill invisible bonds like trust and relationships between people and entire nations. Furthermore, lies are a huge part of warfare, and these lies can lead to a chain of events that can quite literally kill people. Alongside words that kill, there's also the phrase, with your breath so still, it makes me believe. When I think of breath that is still, I think of calmness or sleep or even death. So this phrase could almost be translated as, with your body so calm, asleep, or even dead, it makes me believe in the lies. So, if we put everything together, my translation becomes, quote, would you speak lies to me? With your body so calm, asleep, or dead, it makes me believe in those lies. End quote. Whoever is saying these lyrics almost seems to want to believe in the lies, whatever they are, perhaps being unable to handle the truth. Unfortunately, I have yet to decipher what this truth is, or what exactly the words that kill are, so it is difficult to connect these lines with the rest of the song.
The sins never die. Can't wash the blood off our hands. Let the world fill us all. It's just means to an end.
The next set of lines are a lot easier to understand. Quote, the sins never die, can't wash this blood off our hands. Let the world fear us all, it's just means to an end. End quote. It's basically saying, Quote, sins are a burden that the sinner must bear for the rest of his life, and the blood of those whose lives he took will smear their hands permanently. There's no escaping one's sins, but it doesn't matter. Let the world fear us all for screwing us over. The world itself is just a means to an end. The world is expendable if it means accomplishing intended goals. The subjects of the song are almost acknowledging the consequences of their actions, then proceeding to say that the consequences don't matter, that it's about getting shit done and achieving revenge. Everything is pretty self-explanatory for the most part. I say for the most part because there's actually one very interesting detail that I almost failed to notice. When the folks over at Hideo Blog typed the lyrics in the recent post, the first letter of the word sins was actually capitalized, so the sins could almost be read as an entity of sorts, rather than as the literal term. Could the sins actually be a group of people, perhaps a new unit? Or, as I mentioned before in my previous video, perhaps the sins has to do with the 6 aborted sons of Big Boss during the Les Enfants Terribles project. Another possibility is that the sins refer to all those whose lives were taken by Big Boss, or perhaps even the group that the trailer labels as those who don't exist. It's impossible to tell what exactly the sins refer to, but the fact that its first letter is capitalized indicates that it is symbolism for a certain group of people, at least in my interpretation. Also interesting to note about these lines is that pronouns like our and us are used. My theory is that these pronouns refer to soldiers fighting with Big Boss, and I'll get to why after analyzing this next set of lines, which to me is the most interesting of them all.
Our salvation
It reads, quote, our salvation lies in the Father's sins. Beyond the truth, let me suffer now, end quote. As I mentioned before, the first letter in father is capitalized, so the father is likely a specific individual. Also interesting to note, this time, the word sins is actually all lowercase, so in this line, it likely stands for the literal term and not a group of people. So who are these children whose salvation lie in the father's sins, or Big Boss's sins? My interpretation is that the children stand for soldiers. After Big Boss left the Patriots, he's always had this vision of creating a haven for soldiers, one in which they would no longer be used as tools for the government, and one in which soldiers without nations would call home. This idea first manifested itself as MSF, which was initially created to oppose Cypher, but as MSF grew, so did Big Boss's ambition to create what would eventually become his vision of a soldier's paradise, outer heaven. But to establish this independent nation and haven, Big Boss had to commit many sins along the way. After the destruction of Mother Base, he established Diamond Dogs, his own mercenary group which was willing to take any kind of job, no matter how dirty. Through Diamond Dogs, he amassed a vast amount of funds and resources needed to eventually create Outer Heaven. In Metal Gear Solid 5, we will likely witness Big Boss's questionable methods and sins as leader of Diamond Dogs. With all said and done, Big Boss does eventually succeed in founding Outer Heaven, a salvation for soldiers, and even after Outer Heaven, Big Boss's actions remained questionable. He would take prisoners of war to join his cause, and at some point he even kidnapped Dr. Drago Petrovich Mandar to develop the bipedal tank known as TX-55 Metal Gear as a form of insurance, deterrence, and dominance over the West, the same machine that Solid Snake would eventually destroy in Metal Gear 1. But, despite his sins, if you look beyond the truth of his sinful and questionable actions, Big Boss had good intentions in mind, eventually becoming the salvation and even the father for this illusioned soldiers. Further proof of how much Big Boss cared about his new comrades lies at the end of Metal Gear 1. After surviving his encounter with Solid Snake, and after Outer Heaven is targeted for destruction, he saves as many of his personnel, mercenaries, prisoners, and even resistance members as possible before saving himself. Therefore, my translation for this set of lines is as follows, quote, the salvation of us soldiers lies in our father, Big Boss's sins, beyond the truth of his questionable actions, end quote. And then right after, the phrase, quote, let me suffer now, end quote, is thrown in there, but that one I just don't quite understand because I don't know who me is. Now here's a second interpretation. Our salvation could also mean the salvation of the world, which has been constantly threatened by conflicts between Cypher and Big Boss. Both of them in the end had misinterpreted the boss's will. Ironically, it was Solid Snake, who had never met the boss, who truly carried out her will as she had intended it. So perhaps the term, our salvation lies in the Father's sins, means that the salvation of the world lies in Solid Snake carrying out the will of the boss by correcting, undoing, and overcoming the sins of the the father, but if I had to put money on one of the two interpretations, I would do it for the first one, since soldiers and comrades are central to Metal Gear Solid 5's story. But what do you guys think? The last portion of the song is probably the easiest to understand. Quote, "In my heart, I just know there's no way to light up the dark in his eyes." End quote. Basically, whoever the subject of the song is can no longer turn back from what he has become and the actions he has taken. Whoever this individual used to be is long gone, relinquishing his past ideals for dark motivations that no light will seep through. Alright, so now that I have given my interpretation of the lines, let's put it all together in one giant SparkNote version, so to speak. It's not going to sound graceful, but the point is to get a better understanding of the lyrics, not to Shakespeare it. Anyways, here it is. Quote, "Pride fuels their hate and thirst for revenge. This thirst for revenge must be quenched to prove that they are abandoning their past ideals and committing hypocrisy. And once they go down this road, the only way to make amends is by cleansing themselves with the flames of hell, and there's no turning back. They'll be renouncing and killing their past self to be born anew. Would you speak lies to me? With your body so calm or dead, it makes me believe in those lies. Sins never die. They are a burden that sinners must carry on their shoulders for the rest of their lives. They will also be permanently marked by the blood of those whose lives they took. There's no escaping one's sins, but it doesn't matter. Let the world fear us all for screwing us over. The world itself is just a means to an end. The world is expendable if it means accomplishing our intended goals. The salvation of us soldiers lie in the Father's sins, Big Boss's sins, and you will see that if you look beyond the truth of his questionable actions. Let me suffer now. In my heart, I just know that there's no way to light the darkness in his eyes and his heart." I hope that the way I summarized and phrased everything makes the lyrics easier to understand, but even I have yet to fully decipher the song. The reason I can't fully figure it out is because the song keeps changing perspective. In some lines, it uses pronouns like you and his, as if talking to or about someone directly. Other times, it uses pronouns like us and ours, as if talking for or to an entire group of people, soldiers in my opinion. The song even gets very personal at times, using pronouns like I and me to shift into first-person view. This constant change of perspective makes it difficult to connect some of the lyrics together. Some portions just don't seem to connect with the others, like the one about words that kill or the random "let me suffer now" thrown in there after talking about salvation. But I have done all I can. Perhaps things will become clearer once the full song is released and once we actually get our hands on the game. Before I take my leave, I've got to analyze the most resonant two syllables in the entire song. I think it's quite obvious that during Donna Burke's recording, a prostitute walked into the studio, so she went... Okay, all joking aside, when I hear the two syllables, I hear internal pain, agony, and anger. The two syllables are almost like Big Boss and Kaz's inner monologue. Inside, all they're doing is screaming, suffering a pain that no one quite understands. Of course, keep in mind that this is just my interpretation, so don't be afraid to let our nation know in the comments below your thoughts on the lyrics of the song. And to be further updated on Metal Gear Solid 5, be sure to join the nation and subscribe to Young Gear. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much, and Young out.
Must be cleansed through hypocrisy. Cleansing flames is the only way to